Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to the Eldritch Moon Pre-Release Primer. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I like to do one of these right before all the pre-releases. Some of the information is going to be a little repetitive if you've watched one of these videos before in the past, but I do like to put these out, especially for new players who maybe have never gone before, to talk about what to expect, what to bring, so on and so forth. And then furthermore, we'll go a little bit deeper. We'll talk about really how to build a sealed deck out of a sealed pool, and what archetypes are you looking for, and what mechanics can you expect to see in this new set. So let's jump in, and we're going to begin with what should you bring with you to the pre-release, especially again if you've never gone. A few things I'd recommend. First off, sleeves, and bring extra sleeves. If you open a valuable card, you might not necessarily want to play without sleeves, right? Some people don't seem to mind, but even if you're not concerned with the value of the cards, I do like using sleeves, because when you go to a card store, sometimes the tables aren't the cleanest, and by the time you get to like round 4 and you're trying to shuffle and your cards are sticking together, the sleeves will at least help with that a little bit. So definitely bring sleeves, bring some extra ones in case a sleeve breaks or gets dirty. That way you can just switch it out without having to go to the store and buy a whole new set of sleeves. I'd also bring pen and paper. Pens are very important, sometimes just simply to fill out the registration form, or if you need a DCI card, you're going to need to fill out a form for that. And I've been in situations where stores just plain didn't have enough pens for all the people that needed them, or sometimes they would sell pens. So bring your own. And also, I think it's a great way to keep track of your life total. Yes, you do get a spin down die when you participate in the event, which we'll talk about in a few moments, but if you want to get used to playing especially more competitive Magic, the best way to do that really is to record life totals on pen and paper. That way if there's ever a discrepancy, the judge can come by and kind of figure out what happened a lot easier. And again, not super important for a casual, relaxed pre-release, but it's just a good habit, I think, to get into. Deck boxes can be good. Now, you're going to get a deck box with the cards for your card pool, but it is a little fragile. It's probably not going to last more than just the day of the pre-release if you're carrying it around in your bag or something. So especially if you have cards that are perhaps more valuable that you either brought to trade, or maybe you open something really great, you may want something to protect them, like a deck box or binder. And then finally, just bring some extra dice. Dice are always going to be necessary to keep track of different things on cards, and having a few dice, even if just 2 or 3 extra ones that you bring with you to help keep track of counters or what have you, can be very good. Alright, so I alluded to this already. What are you going to get in your pre-release pack? You can see on the screen here, there's the pre-release pack in the top right corner, and you get a little flyer that gives you a few tips about building a sealed deck. You're also going to get the spin down die, and you're going to get 4 packs of Eldritch Moon, 2 packs of Shadows over Innistrad. It's not pictured here, but you're also going to get a date stamped foil promo card, which could be any mythic or rare from the set that is also playable in your pool. So you're actually going to get a bonus rare or mythic that is playable other than what you get in your 6 packs. Now, you'll also get a foil zombie token, and this is kind of new this time around, and it's sort of an exclusive item. It's double-sided, and it's in foil. So that's actually pretty nice that they included that in addition to everything else. Now, I will say, if you've never gone to a pre-release before, you may want to talk with the LGS ahead of time, or else friends who go there, to kind of know what kind of tournaments they're going to be running. The most typical one you'll see is a 4-round tournament that's a Swiss-style tournament. So even if you lose a round, you can still play all 4 of the rounds, even if you lose all 4 of the rounds. And you'll be matched up with different opponents with similar records as you go through. And it kind of makes for at least some tighter gameplay, and in the end you'll get prizes based on your record. Typically 4-0, 3-1-1, and 3-0 will get prizes, and depending on the store, it could be just different amounts of packs, basically. I've seen other stores that have done 5-round tournaments that have done just true tournaments. They will go ahead and take the top maybe 1 to 10 people and give them prizes depending on the size of the tournament, but they'll run that more like a regular Swiss tournament. Again, you'll be able to play all 5 rounds. I've seen some stores do huge tournaments that could go on all night long, and usually they get bigger prizes. I've seen other stores that will do a more expensive variant tournament, which will have better prizes and a smaller group of players because it costs a lot more to buy in. So a lot of stores do a lot of different things. There's also a two-headed giant variants that you'll see. Sometimes a store will run one of those over the weekend, so if you want to play with a friend, that can actually be kind of a fun format to try out. And even drafts. I've seen some stores do drafts as well. So definitely check ahead of time so you kind of know what you're getting into. Different stores do different types of things. All right, now let's move on to mechanics. And we're going to talk about the mechanics that are reoccurring from Shadows over Innistrad as well as the new ones. And we'll start off with Madness. Madness, of course, a very popular mechanic in Shadows over Innistrad. It's back in Eldritch Moon. You're going to see this a lot in the Izzet colors. Not quite as much, I think, as we saw in the last set, but there's still a fair amount of it sprinkled in there. Next we have Delirium. Delirium's back in full force. It was pretty strong in Shadows over Innistrad. It's back again in Eldritch Moon. Skulk is another mechanic that first showed up in Shadows over Innistrad. We're going to see it again in Eldritch Moon. Transform cards, they're back again, but I did showcase this particular one to show that there are some differences. So for example, we're used to a certain way to transform werewolves from Shadows over Innistrad. Well, this time around we're looking at a transform card that transforms a werewolf into an Eldrazi werewolf, but the trigger is a little bit different. This time you're just going to spend mana to trigger it. Next we have Emerge, and this is actually one of the new mechanics from the set. And basically you can cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the Emerge cost, reduced by that creature's converted mana cost. So it gives you an alternate casting cost that you can use if you sacrifice a creature, and again, that converted mana cost goes towards the Emerge cost. And you'll find the Emerge costs are going to be cheaper than the normal casting cost of these spells. As a matter of fact, most of the time the normal casting cost is quite high. The Emerge cost makes the card much more reasonable. And there's also a lot of good synergies with cards that give you a benefit if you sacrifice them or if they die or go to the graveyard. So look for those cards to play well with Emerge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at archetypes. Next we have Escalate. Escalate can be a very powerful effect because it allows you to get more benefit out of a particular card. So for example, the card we're looking at here, Blessed Alliance, I can pay a white and 1, choose one of these 3 modes, get that, or I could pay a white and 3 and I get 2 out of the 3, or I could pay a white and 5 and get all 3 of them. So it gives you a lot of versatility, and especially later in the game if you have a lot of extra mana lying around, it gives you something to do with it. It can be quite good. Next we have Meld, and Meld may be one of the more confusing new mechanics, but basically in the example you see on the screen here, there is some way to trigger a melding between 2 cards. In this example, if you have Hanwar Battlements and Hanwar Garrison both out on the battlefield at the same time, you can pay 2 red and 3 to meld them. So they'll both turn over much like a transform card, and you'll see a top half on one of them and the bottom half on the other, and they come together to form one giant magic card. Now they work a little different than transform. So when you meld a card, it's almost like you're entering the battlefield with a brand new card. So unlike your transform creatures, they won't keep their counters, they won't keep their enchantments attached to them. This is like getting an actual whole new card. Now if you need to know the converted mana cost of a meld card, for example this one here, Hanwar the Writhing Township, believe it or not, it's actually the sum of the converted mana costs of the 2 cards that created it. So in this case it would be 3 because Hanwar Garrison has 3 and the land of course doesn't have any converted mana cost. That's a little confusing, not super intuitive, but that is the rule. Also, what if this gets, I don't know, maybe flickered, for example, if it enters the exile zone and then comes back to the battlefield. If it does that, then it's going to come back face up as the 2 separate cards. It won't come back as the one big card, it will come back as Hanwar Battlements and Hanwar Garrison. So those are just a few tips to kind of help you navigate through Meld. The good news is, for the most part, the Meld cards are rare and or mythic rare, so you're not going to see these combinations happening too much in Sealed. However, there are 2 common cards in black that do have Meld, so you probably will see those at some point in your play, and they're actually pretty decent limited cards. I'm sure they'll show up, so keep an eye out on them, so it's good to kind of know how this works. Alright, now we're going to talk about building your deck out of the seal pool and what type of things you're looking for when you try to build your deck. And there's an acronym to help remember that, and it's BREAD. So let's go through, starting with B. Those are bombs. So bombs are basically your win conditions. These are the cards that are going to help you win the game, that if you don't have them in your deck, you don't really have a good way to win. So a few examples of bombs could be anything from huge creatures like Emrakul to creatures that just have a lot of evasion and are still very strong, like Gisela. Even Ulvenwald Observer, which is just a big beater, but also allows you to draw more cards potentially in the later portion of the game that can help you get there to win a game. Next, let's talk about removal. Okay, you have your big creatures, but how are you going to get them across for damage? Well, you got to remove your opponent's big creatures, right? So you're going to look for a removal. Cards like Murder are fantastic unconditional removal. Incendiary Flow can only take care of smaller creatures, but it can be very cheap and effective. Choking Restraints can take a creature basically out of combat, and then later on for more mana can even exile it if it has a problematic ability. Next, Evasion. So we've all been in those situations where it's kind of a stalled board state. You can't get your creatures across, your opponent can't get theirs across, but if you have even one or two creatures with evasion, sometimes that means a difference between a long, drawn-out, grindy game hoping to draw something that will change the board state and actually winning the game. So these are all different examples of evasion. You have flying, which is probably the most classic example, but even things like Skulk and Menace can just help you get more damage across. Even Trample, which technically maybe is an evasion, is another way to just get damage across in certain situations. Aggro. Now, it's important when you build a deck to think about your curve. So we talked about a lot of really expensive, big, flashy creatures so far, but it's also important to have some small, aggressive creatures to help you stay alive until you can get to your big things. And these are creatures like you see on the screen here. Typically, these are like 2/2s, 2/3s, 2/1s. They only cost 2 or 3, sometimes even 1 to cast. They're very aggressive. They can get in for some early damage, and they can protect you and trade off for creatures until you can kind of get your plan going in the mid to late game. And finally, we have duds. And duds is a little misleading because duds are basically cards in your sideboard. It doesn't mean they're really bad cards. It just means you're not using them right now for whatever reason, but don't forget they're there. These are all examples of cards that might not be super good to put in your deck to begin with all the time, but might be really good against certain matchups. So Oath of Liliana, for example, is not really good if your opponent's playing a lot of small creatures and going really wide with tokens, but if they're really relying on like one big creature to be ramped into play, or maybe they're using the emerge mechanic, for example, Oath of Liliana becomes really awesome, so you want to make sure you put that in. Providence, not a super great card to start out with, but if you have a really aggressive deck with a lot of burn that you're up against, might be worth putting it in to hopefully gain a whole lot of life in the late game and reset the table. Coax from the Blind Eternities. This could be good if your opponent has a lot of exile effects and you are playing maybe some emerge creatures and you want to be able to get your Eldrazi back from exile. This is a way to do that. Alright, next we're going to talk about synergies, and basically when you're building your deck, what are you trying to put together? You have a big seal pool there, you see all these cards doing all different things. Are there any trends that I can watch for? And there are built-in archetypes in certain decks that you can try to build, and we're going to talk about some of these now. Some you'll be familiar with from Shadows over Innistrad. They haven't changed much, quite honestly, but others will be a little bit different. Let's start off with one that we're very familiar with from Shadows, and that's werewolves. Gruul colors, green and red, are fantastic for a werewolf tribal build. Tribal in general is going to be something that you're going to see quite a bit of in the Innistrad block in general, but if you're in green and red, you have a lot of good green and red cards. Look for synergies for wolves and werewolves. Humans. This is a very infamous tribe at this point. But yes, Selesnya, green and white colored humans, still a thing in Eldritch Moon, still very, very strong. So check out those cards. You may have a nice tribal element with cards like Herons of the Grace, for example, that can help buff your other humans. Spirits, definitely a bigger thing, I think, now that we have Eldritch Moon than just Shadows over Innistrad. Seems like Spirits got a nice little push. It's another archetype you're going to find mostly in Azorius, although they do cross over into other colors as well. But you can put together a pretty nice Azorius limited deck if you get the right Spirits. Vampires. So vampires kind of go almost hand in hand with madness. You're going to find a lot of really economical red and black madness cards, and also a lot of good vampires, and a lot of cards that can help buff your vampires. So it can be a very fast, very aggressive strategy, sometimes limited, if you get the right cards. Orzhovs has a lot of small token creatures. They have a lot of zombies. They have a lot of spirit tokens. They have a lot of small flyers, a lot of small humans. And look for that strategy. A card like Campaign of Vengeance, for example, might not be good in a lot of decks, but if you have a whole lot of tokens, going wide with a bunch of creatures, that's a fantastic card to use, for example. So watch out for that strategy. Orzhovs are really all about going wide and just overwhelming your opponent. Dimir. Now Dimir, black and blue, is doing a zombie theme, but they're also kind of doing a self-mill Graveyard Matters theme. So there's a lot of cards that you can mill yourself into your graveyard that then you can either reanimate them, you can either return them to your hand, or you can get some sort of benefit for them just being there or being able to play them even from your graveyard. So that's really what these two colors are trying to do. Next we have Delirium. Now Delirium does fall into a number of different colors. However, Golgari really is all about Delirium. You're going to find a lot of cards that are going to help mill yourself, get to Delirium, and then you're going to get extra value out of those Delirium creatures. Is a deck you can find which is blue and red. This is really all about instants and sorceries and getting value off them, as well as some small creatures. So this is a little different than some of these other archetypes because it's not running a whole bunch of creatures. It's running burn spells, it's running counter magic, it's running small creatures that get buffs like the one you see here on the screen, and that's how it's planning on winning. It's a little bit different, sometimes a little more difficult to play if you're not familiar with that archetype, but it can also be still a lot of fun and rewarding. And finally, the last archetype to talk about is the Emerge archetype, which really works well in the Simic colors. This also goes a little bit into black, but you're going to find most of these cards are in Simic. And the way this really finds value is by using the Emerge cost to play large creatures with effects a little bit cheaper, but then also when you sacrifice creatures for Emerge, there's creatures that will give you value from those sacrifices. You'll find these mostly in green and blue. However, you will find them in the other colors as well. So this is an interesting strategy. It's really all about going all in on Eldrazi's and small creatures that you can sacrifice to them. So having said that, those are the archetypes. Hopefully that helps you a little bit at least get prepared for the pre-release that will be coming up in, really, at the time you watch this video, the next night or throughout the weekend. So good luck, and hopefully things will go well. Love to hear how you did on your pre-release. Let me know in the comments below. Until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.